Please state your name.
Adita Cross.
What was life like before the war?
Life was simple. My father was a lawyer, so my family was pretty comfortable. I had been one of those girls insulated by happiness. I loved to go places with my mother and run around in the sun. My grandmother would tell me stories about different structures around the city. My mother used to play the piano. It was truly a peaceful existence where I was scared of mundane things like scary stories rather than men with guns.
How were you impacted by the invasion of the Nazis?
My childhood was taken away from me. The war started when I was 9 years old, and after that, I was forced to either grow up or get left behind. My parents still tried to protect me from everything, but there was only so much they could do. The morning the Nazis invaded, the entire city was shaking. In fact, I remember it was shuddering so hard, it tickled the soles of my feet. Aside from the shaking, everything was silent. There was no bands playing, no loud laughter or commotion. No one spoke, yelled, or cheered. That was the day I stopped being afraid of skeletons and old stories about phantom hands and started being afraid of men.
What were your thoughts on the Terezin ghetto?
When I first saw the Terezin ghetto, I thought it was like a dynamic city. It was a place with avenues full of people at a hospital, fire station, kitchens, workshops, a daycare center. But if you looked more carefully, you'd realize that Terezin was just a city where the streets led to nowhere.
When did you first start to realize the importance of books?
I started to realize the importance of books in the Terezin ghetto. I would cart books to different areas in the ghetto and soon started to sneak to corners where I could read them. It was when I was reading that I realized the power of importance of books. Looking back, books took me much further than any pair of shoes. In fact, starting a book is like boarding a train to go on a holiday.
In what ways did you see the school change the children?
Every time the school started and the books were passed around, or the teachers gathered the students to teach them about a topic, the children would immediately transform into children who did not live in an extermination camp. They say people being murdered on a daily basis. Instead, they were children desperate to learn new things, to forget about their surroundings. It did them good having this escape.
What was the importance of education to you?
Education was and still is very important to me. While I may not have loved going to school before the war, having my education taken away from me was something that affected me much more than I thought it would have. After the Nazi banned Jewish children from attending schools, my father started to teach me what he could. Some days we'd use the globe and my father would teach me geography, slowly spinning the globe on its metal stand, stopping suddenly and using a finger at the spot where we guessed it might be. Even when we were sent to Terezin and then Auschwitz, my father and I still had daily lessons. I would learn geography on Tuesdays, mathematics on Wednesdays, and so on. We continued this until my father became ill with pneumonia and passed away. After that, I did my best to continue my education, listening to the teachers, giving their lessons to the children.
After realizing that your life was in greater danger than you had first assumed, how did you find the courage to continue hiding the books?
I thought about how books helped me to cope with everything, and how the children were able to escape for a little bit of time. I also thought about Freddie Hirschwitz. I saw him as an indestructible man, like the unstoppable golem in the Jewish legend, who one day would save them all. Freddie Hirschwitz. His name gave me courage.
How did losing your father affect your faith in religion?
After my father died, I lost almost all my faith in religion. I remember specifically after I just learned of my father's death. I remember that I screamed. If I had God in front of me, I'd tell him that what I thought of him and his twisted sense of compassion. How he could just sit by and watch as we were broken down in piece by piece. This did not forever impact my faith. I later stopped blaming these things on a higher power. I realized that men are the cause of this, all of the death and dehumanization.
How did you cope with your surroundings?
I coped with my surroundings through two methods. The first was what I called my mental photo album. I would find solitary place and look inward, flipping through the photos of my life in my mind, looking for certain ones which I knew would bring me peace. Even if only for a few seconds or minutes. I did this because when you can't dream about the future, you can always dream about the past. The other method I used was reading. As with the mental photo album, I would find a small corner somewhere where I could not be disturbed, and I would lose myself in the books that I read. It didn't matter what the content of the book was. Anything was better than what I was living in.
How did you feel when you were liberated?
When I was first liberated, I was confused as to what was occurring. I had been severely starved and dehydrated. I was losing my grip on reality when they came. I thought that I and everyone had simply gone crazy, that everyone had hit their breaking point, but this was not the case. Instead, what I thought were ridiculous people moving about were actually British soldiers. At first, I believed that everyone was so shocked that soldiers had been liberated them that they could be nothing but grateful. This did not last long. Very soon after the prisoners got over their shock, they began to shout at the British soldiers, asking, why have you taken so long? I myself was just grateful to be able to take my mother to the hospital, where she could finally get the care that she needed. Little did I know that the hospital wasn't going to be enough.
What were the days after liberation like?
The days after liberation were filled with getting my mother into the hospital, sitting by her side, waiting for her to recover, waving farewell to my friend Margaret, whom I had been with since terrorism. She was lucky enough to have been reunited with her father, who knew of people who would give them a place to stay. Because my mother was ill and I was not able to leave with them. But Margaret gave me the address and promised to see me soon. My home will be your home. It was a sister's declaration of love. After everything we went through together, we were sisters.
How did you feel when you were introduced to a new book after you were freed?
When I saw the first book after being liberated, I immediately asked to borrow it. And even after the nurse told me it was all in English, I didn't care. I sat by my mother's side, inhaled the smell of paper, fanned the pages quickly with my thumb, and smiled.
Where did you go after your mother died in the hospital?
I traveled to the address that Margaret gave me, but they weren't there. I had worried that I waited too long and they moved on. Luckily, I was told of their new location, and I quickly went there, meeting a friend from Auschwitz on the way. Reuniting with Margaret was amazing. We were so happy to see each other. I will never forget saying, "We're going to fall!" and Margaret responding, "What does that matter, as long as we're together?"
Please state your name.
Freddie Hurst.
Okay. When did you realize that the Nazi regime was bigger than you had first realized?
Living in Germany, I watched as the Nazis slowly gained power and changed the way that we live. The anti-Semitism got worse and worse. People spray painting, destroying property. But I truly realized that the Nazi regime was bigger and more powerful than I first realized when I saw someone painting a yellow X on a large wooden entrance to the building I was in. When I went out to comfort him, he had absolutely no remorse, and there was not an ounce of respect in him. I couldn't understand it. I started to shake and yell at him, and a woman across the street saw. She accused me of harassing and hurting the boy when I had done no such thing. A friend of mine dragged me away from the boy and inside the building. He knew that if I had continued to reprimand the boy, I would have been arrested or worse. That was when I realized the Nazi regime had gotten so powerful that it has determined the value of a person to be stronger than the value of another.
How did you keep up morale in terrorism?
I knew that in such conditions we had in terrorism, people would lose their morale at an alarming rate. So I continued what I did best: organize games, sporting matches, and religious teachings for all who wanted to come. In one instance of how I kept the morale up was a soccer match, organized between the SS guards and the Jews. The aim of this was to show that children and even adults that were Jews would not back down, that the Nazis could not default to us on all fronts. This even worked well until one idiot prisoner was too scared to stand up against the guard and instead let him down, making him win in goal.
How important was it to you that children continue to be taught about their religion?
It was so important for me to continue to teach the children because you can still shape them, improve them. One man said to me, "We mustn't lose hope, Freddie, to let the flame go out." From that point on, I have lived by this.
What was the first turning point you can identify in the rise of anti-Semitism?
The first turning point I can identify is when they stopped fixing the windows at the JPD headquarters because the stone throwing became a daily event. Things got worse after that. Jews were insulted and children were taken out of Jewish classes.
Do you feel like you experienced choiceless choices? What about others?
I would say that I do and I don't. Maybe it just depends on the circumstance. I believe that there is always a choice to make, whether a person likes it or not. To give you an example, I would bring back the soccer match from the terrorism ghetto. The aim of this match was to prove that Jews and Nazis can't win everything. Near the end of the soccer match, a Jewish defender was being raced towards by an SS guard. This defender had the choice of taking the ball away, winning the game, or letting the guard score the goal. The defender had chose to let the guard win the game, letting every single prisoner in the ghetto down. When I confronted him about this, he said he's a real sadist. No way I was going to trip him and risk my neck. Some may believe that this was a choiceless choice, but I believe that the moral of a whole person is much more important than the meaning of which a person can heal from.
How were you able to continue to smile while you saw such horrible atrocities?
I was able to smile through everything I experienced at the hands of the Nazis, but I was thinking of those I can help. I also think about the small and subtle ways I can resist the Nazis. Being the head of the school means I have to report to the leaders of the camp. Doing this is no easy task. And most believe that I am in cohorts with them. This is not the truth. It is the opposite, really. Every time I meet with the Nazis, I am finding my own little rebellion against them. Every time I smile, I'm slightly informing the Nazis that they have not won, that they have not managed to break down my soul or my faith in my religion.
Did you know of a resistance organization in the camp? What role did you play?
I was aware of the fact that there was a resistance organization within the camp. While I did have the dealings with them regarding the school supplies and the ongoings of the camp, I did not trust them, nor did they trust me. In Auschwitz, or even anywhere in Europe during that time, the only person whom a person can truly trust was themselves. Rather than being a part of the major organization, I chose to have my own little resistance. The Nazis believed that I was their good little pet, but I used the little power they gave me to teach the children about the Jewish heritage and faith, undermining the Nazis' attempt to erase the Jews.